Hey, it's Millie, and welcome to the Generalist World podcast. This is a show where I interview people from the Generalist World community, and we talk things like the future of work, careers, predictions, their hot takes, and really understand what their squiggly careers have looked like. So if you're a generalist who feels like they're living in a specialized world, this is the podcast for you. Hey, Rox.
Oh, hi, Millie.
Thank you so much for being here. We're having an awesome day co-working at Ramen Space in London. Charlie Ward, check him out on LinkedIn and Twitter. And I'm so excited to get into this chat because you are a fairly new Generalist World member. And
indeed, yes. And thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here today.
Yes. I'm wondering, what was it about Generalist World that sparked you to be like, oh, maybe that could be the space for me?
So I've been following Generalist World and you're on LinkedIn for quite a while. And I was like, oh, definitely a space I can see kind of fitting in there. And I went to a London meetup event, which was a couple of weeks ago. And I talked to one of the members, Jitin, and he was talking about his experience and, kind of being part of the community year after year. And at the end, I was like, I'm sold. I just went home and signed up. So here I am today. And there's been, a couple of weeks, but it feels like I've been part of the community for ages now. So, I think it is a good sign. So
yeah, we have that effect. And okay, great. Now you have an amazing background. So I would love to kind of just dig into your career story. So when you are at a barbecue or maybe at Christmas and someone's like, this is Rox, how do you describe what you do?
Right. Something I really struggle with. I think it's getting better since I joined Generalist World. But I think I'd say I'm probably someone who's endlessly curious and thrives on change and variety, I would say. And I think I tend to kind of dive deep into fields and then kind of figure them out and then move on to the next thing, which can be a bit tricky these days when you try and build a career. But I think sort of the underlying thread throughout my career has been sort of healthcare. That's been something I've been kind of passionate about, particularly mental health. I just light up when I hear about it, anything sort of innovation, public health, that sort of space. So I think that would be me in a nutshell before going into too much detail, going off a tangent.
We hear a lot about squiggly careers, and when I hear what you just described of kind of going deep into a domain and then coming and learning everything you want to learn and then coming back out, I think of that almost as spiky. And there is Wes Ko, who is a founder of Maven, has this really amazing analogy around, she calls it a spiky point of view. And I think it's kind of like what you've just described, where you get this really interesting perspective from going deep into a domain or an area or a function, but then coming out and maybe then going into a different one. And I wonder, could you tell us about some of those spikes? So your thread has been healthcare. What are some of the things you've gone deep in?
Right, it's a good question. So if I'm thinking sort of back to sort of many years ago, so back to when I was a student, and I was doing I was a bit biomedical sciences stuff, quite general sort of degree, and I was in the lab, the anatomy sort of lab, and I kind of had held brain in my hands for the first time, and I think I was just this overly excited student, kind of constantly raising my hand, and there was the director of the neuroscience program there, and said, "You seem to really love this stuff. You should transfer to the neuroscience program," which I did the very next day, and I absolutely loved it.
Quick sell.
Yeah, definitely. You say no more. So I absolutely loved it, and I really enjoyed neuroscience. I was considering a sort of PhD in that area. I was considering medical school, quite a few things. But I think when I was doing kind of my final year research project in the lab, it kind of felt like if I was to do this as a career, I could potentially spend years just studying one molecule, not having a real world impact. So that moved into exploring other options. So because I was still kind of interested in that kind of healthcare space, sort of it was the NHS grad scheme that kind of came up at that point. So that's what I did. I went for it, but I made a bit of a mistake, as we all do at the start of our careers. So I went into financial management, which I think felt more of a safe choice for me at the time. Kind of a bit, shy, just a way. I think that's sort of how I justify it. So that was interesting because I was kind of good at it. I didn't really enjoy it, and it was quite hard to move out of it. So somehow ended up to move out of it, moved into kind of more sort of program management work. So I did quite a bit in mental health, various areas. And then through some of my work, I think one of the things that came up, and again, was sort of people. And, you try to implement a project, you're trying to do this, it's always about people. So this current role is around sort of workforce transformation and sort of strategic HR. So I got into it to learn more about it, and then ended up doing a sort of master's, which I'm doing in organizational design and development. And I think even though it seems like, I've done, finance and operations, program management, and now you're doing HR. So what is the thread? But I think my degree now, the organizational design and development, there's a lot around organizational psychology. So I think it's that link against sort of neuroscience where it kind of all started. And I think throughout my career, that's always kind of been my point of view and the connection. And I'm like, okay, we're trying to implement this. Why is there resistance? Is there something about, maybe the system, maybe this. So it's kind of, I feel like it's kind of come round full circle. So I think it's given me a bit of a kind of system understanding of healthcare, which has been great. But yeah, it's been quite a journey.
Okay. I'm a very visual person. And when you were describing that, I was imagining, at first I was seeing your career as spiky, but then I started imagining it almost like a spiral, like going up.
I love that.
When you said, eventually you got to this other point and it linked right back to neuroscience. Do these like show up day to day for you? Like, are you thinking about neuroscience in your day to day?
It's interesting because I think I still kind of try to be connected. I mean, I'm not pretending to be, have neuroscience is evolving and things keep changing. And I try to kind of tap into that. But I think it's sort of some of the thinking, the concepts, particularly more around kind of psychology as well, and not just necessarily neuroscience. But I do think about it. I'm like, okay, so there's, I don't know, let's say we're implementing a project like a big change management. There's something about, your early champions and sort of people who kind of buy in, and sort of what's kind of the thinking behind? Is there something, we talk about mirror neurons, I know that's the most hyped thing in neuroscience. I know a lot of things have been debunked about it, but is there something about that kind of empathy, seeing someone else doing, and and then you get that buy-in? I think it's just me, my head goes off for lots of tangents, but I think I do kind of bring that perspective in kind of my own world. I don't think I necessarily share it as much at work, and maybe that's something I need to kind of think to do more in the future, but that's definitely sort of in the background, I would say.
That's super cool. And when you are at work, do you feel like you are in kind of gravitating toward like generalist roles, or how does that kind of work for you?
It's tricky. I feel like it's quite hard to find some generalist roles in sort of the area I'm working in. And what I've kind of, the way I've managed to kind of make it work is kind of crafting my own roles sometimes. So I would start a role just usually because there's something interesting about it. Like this one, I was kind of the workforce, maybe quite the role itself, maybe it's not the best fit, but there's something I want to learn more about. And then just kind of raise my hand for anything exciting that comes up. And because sort of the master's I'm doing is via the apprenticeship route, which means that all the assignments are linked to actual work you're doing at work. So I'll be like, I need this project to meet this competency. And I just start doing other stuff that's not necessarily part of my role. So I think that's kind of how I managed to make it a bit more generalist. But I think there's definitely more room to kind of link those sort of different domains, I would say.
If I had £1 for every time I've heard someone in the generalist role community say, and then I created my own role, this is like such a pattern that I see again and again. Do you have any advice, or when you look back, any learnings on what made this possible for you to be able to get into these positions where you could create your own roles?
That is interesting. I think it very much depends on sort of your immediate team, your manager as well. And I think sometimes you can apply for a role and it can be tricky to get a feel for it. But I think the more you are in the sort of workforce in your career, I think you get more of a feel for what that role could be. And I think even sort of during the interviews, you could ask things around development. I'm interested in this area. Is there any opportunities for development? And sometimes people, if they're looking for something that's quite specialised, might be put off by that. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just not a good option, sort of mutual sort of decision in terms of that. So that's kind of what I've found, and trying. You can always ask, and the worst can happen is a no, and then you kind of know.
And when you kind of look back at these different roles that you've entered and different roles that you've been able to create, do you have any kind of standout learnings on what's worked really well when it comes to telling your story? So to pulling all of these wonderful threads together, is there anything that you, has been like, wow, that works really well, that lands?
I think that it's helpful because I think I'll admit I kind of struggled with that. I think as we're talking about how do you introduce yourself, and people ask you a lot, what do you do? And I'm like, what do I do? I used to be this and now I do this and now I do that. And I think, again, being part of generalist world, I think it's helped me quite a lot with that. And these days I even like to introduce myself as a generalist, which I feel like kind of, brings it all together. I think, as I said, the kind of healthcare is the underlying thread, but I just, a person who just loves trying different things, always curious, always loves learning. And I think that's kind of how I bring it together. But there's definitely more room to shape that narrative, I think.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think we are taught from probably when we're 5 years old to tell stories in chronological order. And so I think generalists, our natural inclination, or anyone's natural inclination, is to be I did this and then I did this and then I did this and then I did this. But I think it's the job of the generalist to make the connections for people. And I love how you can position it that your red thread is in healthcare. And so that gives people an anchor and something to hold on to and be okay, right, I can see where she fits there. And then let's see how these other threads kind of pull together.
No, absolutely. Totally agree.
What's your favorite part of your job?
Oh, interesting. I think, first of all, I think it's the people I work with. I think at the moment it's just probably the best culture I've experienced in the team. Everyone's really supportive, and I think my manager especially been quite keen on my development. So I think that's sort of one of the key things, and just being able to try different things. I think that the variety and sort of being able to just experiment, try different things. I think that's probably what I love the most. And the people side of things, I think some of the things I'm doing now around a bit up in that culture change, sort of leadership development, things that maybe I wouldn't have done before. So I think it kind of builds those sort of softer sort of skills when it comes to change, kind of, when you add the finance in the past, the harder skills, more analytical side, and this is focusing more on the kind of human sort of softer side of things. So really enjoy that.
So you work with a lot of change and transformation. And if someone is listening to this and is thinking of that as a potential next career step or career path, do you have any advice for them to be able to how to break into this?
Yeah, that is interesting. And I think sometimes we talk about change and transformation, it kind of means different things to people. And I think for me, ultimately, in sort of think healthcare, I think I'm thinking what is the outcome? What are you trying to do? Because ultimately it's kind of better patient care and better patient outcomes. So that could come in different ways, whether that's generally through innovation in digital, or it could be all sorts of workforce transformation, different models. I think it's an area, again, that people don't tend to kind of necessarily kind of follow a bit of a linear path. So I think that's probably I would recommend it as a good area for generalists, because you can come from different areas. Usually you could come sort of project management, or you can have kind of domain expertise, and then you move into this area. But I think as a bit of advice, again, just try experiment. I think that's probably one of the areas a bit more open to kind of different experiences and perspectives, I'd say.
And is there anyone that change and transformation isn't a good fit for?
Interesting. I think if you're not particularly a big fan of, change and transformation yourself, and you like things, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Sure.
You prefer things, as they are, and you're like your routine, maybe that's not necessarily a good fit, because I think you kind of need to kind of leave those values a bit as well. I think if we're human beings, and I think very few people are truly comfortable with change, especially when it's kind of imposed externally. But I think there is something around that, thinking about your preferences in terms of sort of pace, whether you prefer something quite narrow and focused. And again, because change encompasses everything. You could have a very defined project, and that could still be change. So I think, anyone could get into it, but I think it's just being kind of mindful of some of sort of the, the environment and some of the requirements of the role, I would say.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. When you look back at your journey of professional development, has there been any really big growth levers, something you've done? Maybe it's coaching or mentorship, or maybe it's a job, a challenging role. Has there been any kind of big growth levers that you feel like you got to grow in maybe a short amount of time?
I mean, I've done a lot of qualifications. Sometimes I think at this point I tend to leave them on my CV. I think I do kind of like academics study. And I think that's definitely kind of helped in terms of that. But I think much more importantly is just kind of throwing yourself into the work and actually experiencing different things. And I think, working with people that maybe you're not particularly used to working, different perspectives. And I think that's sort of what I find quite helpful. But I'm not sure if I've gone off a tangent and missed the question.
It's all good. Yeah. Just thinking about Yeah, I think when a lot of people arrive in generalist world, they come for many different reasons. And often one of the reasons they come is because they're at this kind of inflection point where they're like, they've either maybe outgrown a role or they want to. We just interviewed Ellie. She's about to start a company and she was like, this is a really good time to be around this crew. And I think there is, even when I look back in my own career, like there has been some almost like a growth spurt, it feels like. And it's often the growth spurt comes from something challenging that's happened. Maybe it was like I was working in like a really, really chaotic startup at one point, and at the time it was really difficult. But in fact, the growth that came from that, I feel like pushed me forward maybe 2 years. It was like a big lever. And so, yeah, I was just curious if there's, and the other actual example, which is a lot more recent, is I started working with a coach, and I feel like she pushed me forward again, like maybe 6 months, where she just like levered me. So I was wondering if there's anything like that.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think the other thing with sort of coaching, mentorship, and I've kind of done it, and it's been quite helpful. But I think as a generalist, I think that's something that particularly I've kind of struggled with, because I think it's easy to find a mentor who's, you know, gone through the kind of the linear path and then they can advise into your career. I think it's a bit harder in terms of, you know, the generalist sort of side of things. And I think that's probably something that I'm kind of thinking to kind of try and build a bit more, those sort of connections to sort of coaching and mentorship. But I think back to your point, sort of when things get challenging, I think at the moment sort of healthcare is quite a difficult space. I think a lot of people are kind of losing their jobs. It's very challenging, and I think sometimes when things get tough, I think they make you kind of think about, you know, and as I'm approaching kind of almost a decade now in healthcare, I think it's making me think, okay, what have I done? What are my strengths? Where do I want to move into next? And I think if you've worked in the NHS or with the NHS, you know that unfortunately there's a lot of, you know, bureaucracy, quite slow working. I feel like a lot of my energy sometimes goes to try and, you know, push against those. And I think now I'm probably at that stage where I still very much care about this, but would I be making a greater contribution from the outside? Whether that's something partnering with sort of, you know, a lot of starters doing great work in this space, health tech, or stepping into that place myself. So I think very much is a space of exploration for me at the moment. But I agree about when things get a bit tough, they kind of help as a bit of sort of redirection and considering things, looking at things from a different perspective. So totally.
Yeah, one of our members, Sean, has this, I believe it's actually from academic research as well. It's this concept of explore and then exploit. I don't love the word exploit, but you get the gist, where it's like you spend time exploring and then you figure out this is the thing I'm going to learn, or this is the thing that's going to make the difference, and then you exploit it. I guess another word could be like leverage. And I think, yeah, there's this thread and pattern that I see in a lot of Generalist World members where it's kind of just in our DNA to explore and to be like quite to maybe get to a point where we're comfortable with that exploration.
No, I love that. Definitely.
Do you have any kind of guiding frameworks, philosophies, mantras that you live by? Could be through work or just personal in life.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I was just reflecting the other day, and I think I've always been someone who's kind of like driven. I need a target. I'm very competitive, and it's always been like, you know, trying to get from A to B, and that's worked well for the most part. But I think especially in recent months, I think I've kind of thought things through, like trying to have a bit of a different approach and kind of letting things go a bit, and a bit more sort of experimentation and trying things and being okay with things not being perfect and saying yes more, like, you know, today you know, say yes, and whilst the worst that could happen, I could just say something silly, but that's absolutely fine.
We can edit it out.
So I think that there is something about that kind of moving from more of a like driver to more of a kind of navigator type. So that's probably one. The other thing, again, because I think I'm quite sort of externally focused, I'll just step into a room and I can kind of sense the vibe and always try and make sure everyone's kind of comfortable. And I think that, you know, is great, but I think sometimes can come at the detriment of kind of yourself and your sort of internal sort of kind of person. I'm trying to do a bit more of that. And I think there's like simple things, like I like to call like an energy audit. So if you know, spend time with a person and then kind of check in with yourself, it's like, do I feel energized? Do I feel a bit drained after spending time with this person? Or even things like, you know, if you're procrastinating about something, it might just be that, you know, it's complexity of the task, but is it because maybe it's not the right fit, not the right job for you? So I think I'm just trying to be a bit more aware of that. So, yeah, there's some other things.
The body keeps the score. And I think yes to the energy audit. And it's amazing when you start doing this and start noticing, because you'll quite quickly notice if you have some kind of self-awareness of how obvious it is when something isn't a fit. You can also do this with your calendar.
Ooh,
I know that
tell me more.
yeah, people have like color-coded their calendar. So like say after a call, you'll take 30 seconds to be like, how did I feel after that? And you might, if it was awful, you might color-code it red. And if it was great, you might color code it green. And then by the end of the month, you're going to have almost like a traffic light system of the things that are giving you more energy. One of the things I was working with my coach recently was to simply ask the question, because I'm always juggling a lot of plates. I've got Generalist world. I'm a director on a few boards on the island that I live on, and it feels like I'm constantly juggling. And it's really hard to know if I'm doing it out of a place of like people pleasing, or if it's a place of like genuine, like giving with a full heart, especially for the volunteer things. They can take up many, many hours. And the simple question is, was that worth it? So just stopping afterwards and being like, I just went to this meeting. It was a 2.5-hour board meeting, and like, we got to hear, and simply being like, was that worth it? Did that feel like that was worth it? And yeah, I think sometimes we like really overcomplicate these like prioritization frameworks and stuff. And it's like, actually just check in with yourself. How do you feel? And was it worth it?
I'm going to start using that question. Thanks, Ellie.
Let's talk predictions. Let's talk the future. So you are at a very interesting, you have a very interesting perspective. You're super deep in this healthcare world. There's a lot of change happening in the world at the moment, for better or for worse. Do you have any predictions that might, over the next, say, 12 to 24 months that you predict that we might be seeing?
Right, I think probably two things. I think one is probably more of that kind of entrepreneurship wave. And I think it's probably coming as a result of kind of, mass layoffs we've been hearing about. And I think there is something about, if anyone's been looking for a job recently, can tell that, maybe that's a strong word, but I find it a bit dehumanizing sometimes, which can be quite difficult. And I think that's probably going to encourage people a bit more to move into that space, which will be interesting to see. So that's one of the things. I think the other one, because I was talking, healthcare and mental health and all of that, I think it's probably more of a hope than prediction. But I think if you think about sort of, mental health tech, I think a lot of it has focused quite a lot on kind of personal responsibility. You have the well-being apps and more focus on sort of the less maybe serious mental health conditions, which has been great. But I think going forward, I think there's probably more room to move in that kind of space where it's more systemic solutions and more kind of serious mental health. And it is tricky. I think some of the more serious problems are kind of they require that integration between different parts. And if you think mental health, you have to think about wider determinants of health and things about employment and finances and housing and all of that. And it's difficult when you're trying to bring an innovative solution. You're going to run into lots of barriers. But it does seem, and I hope so, that we're trying to kind of tackle some of this more systemic sort of issues as well, rather than just kind of quite narrow. But I can totally see why that's the focus, having myself gone through, a few ideas and criteria and getting rid of it because that'd be too difficult or, not feasible to be done in this space. So.
Yeah. Do you think that technology can be a driver for making this kind of systemic change?
I would very much hope so. I think it's got the potential, and I think there is probably something around that partnership between, and that's where I feel like I can, come in and I hopefully make a kind of difference in that way, because it can be difficult to implement things in healthcare. I think we all know that, you might be doing a quick successful pilot, which is great, but if you start thinking about scaling, you've run into lots of issues when it comes to implementation. I think the key thing is, I think starting with the pain point. And it needs to be the sort of kind of buyer's pain point. It's very easy to think, oh, there's this problem, but do people care enough about it to actually pay and kind of get involved and get staff on board with it? So yeah, it's a tricky space, but I'm hoping that we'll see more of that going forward.
Yeah, fall in love with the problem, not the product.
Indeed.
Because the product will almost certainly change.
Totally.
Rox, this has been amazing. Has there been anything that I haven't asked that you would like to dig into while you have the microphone?
Probably there's something, and you touched on that. I think there's something about the power of community for generalists, and I think that's why I love Generalist World so much. And I think if everyone did community like Generalist World, I really think the world would be a better place. Honestly, I think it makes such a difference. I think when you've kind of been, you feel on your own and you try different things that you not quite kind of understood, I think it's helpful to kind of be part of a community that kind of understands that. So I feel like I'm home, and I'm really happy. So thanks for everything you're doing
on the podcast. That's always going to happen.
Oh,
thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Millie. Really appreciate
it's been great.
it. Thank you.